China's industrial scene and the impact on India. Many people were asking us for the last 2-3 months after this COVID, MNCs are leaving China, and what is the opportunity for India to grab the business from MNCs? In this regard, we discussed with Mr. Venkataraman also, and his son, Mr. Swaminathan in Singapore. Both are doing a lot of research on China for the last 10-15 years. And Mr. Venkataraman is a chemical engineer from Annamalai University, 68 back. And Mr. Swaminathan is a BITS Pilani engineer, and he did his MBA from IIMA Ahmedabad. Both were known to Tamil Nadu chemical industries, Indian chemical industries, and also in the region, Southeast Asia. They have done a lot of research work on the China. So we thought it would be up for us to invite them to talk about China's today's industrial scene and how India can gain from this situation. In the program நடத்துறதுக்கு Annamalai University alumni Mahendra Kumar, Saravanan, போன்ற ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸும் they said that they would help us. I thank all of them. And இந்த ப்ரோக்ராம்ல நம்ம பேச போற விஷயங்கள் நிறைய entrepreneurs and chemical industry association members. Not only that, generally what's happening in China, what's going to happen in China அப்படின்னு கேட்கிற கேள்விகளுக்கெல்லாம் நிறைய விடை கிடைக்கும். இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியை பார்க்குற எல்லாரும் அவங்களோட கொஸ்டின்ஸ் அனுப்பலாம். Whatever possible, we will answer today's program or we will answer them separately through email. We have the contact numbers of all our members, or you can give your mail ID or your number. We will contact you. And India oda idu pathina, India third largest chemical producer in the Asia, and we are sixth largest in the world. So India is also a significant player in chemical industry. So we can attract the MNCs who want to set up chemical industries or pharma industry in India. I think first I will invite Mr. Swaminathan to make his presentation and the short talk. It will be lasting for 25 minutes or 30 minutes. And then I will invite Mr. Venkataraman to talk about more with reference to India. Now over to Mr. Swaminathan.
Thank you, Mr. Ilanahai. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address this audience. I have a presentation which I will share on the screen in a couple of minutes, in a couple of seconds. Okay, so thank you once again. I'm going to talk a little bit of macro picture about the chemical industry scenario in China, especially in light of developments that have happened in the last 1.5 years or so. There have been some significant developments, and I will discuss the impact of that on Chinese chemical industry. So basically, I will first give a short introduction on the size of Chinese chemical industry. Then we will discuss about the US-China trade war, which is now proving to be a very significant issue for all industries in China. And since the last 3 months, the impact of COVID-19 on chemical industry, and again, that has provoked the kind of questions that Mr. Ilanahai was talking about. And we will also see what is the attractiveness of investments in China and how India compares with that and what we can learn from that, and some trends and shifts in trade and investment as a consequence of that. So first, I will start with an introduction to the Chinese chemical industry. See, China, as we all know, is the second largest economy in the world after United States. The GDP of $14.2 trillion at the end of 2019. The size of Chinese chemical industry is about $1.4 trillion. It's almost about 10% of Chinese GDP. And that's about 35% of the global sales of chemical industry in the world. If you look at Europe, it is about 17%, US is about 14%, so which means that the Chinese chemical industry is bigger than US plus Europe combined. So that's how big the Chinese chemical industry has become. In comparison, Indian chemical industry is about $100 billion, and the size of the Indian chemical industry is about 1/10 of the Chinese chemical industry. For China, the top markets for exports are basically rest of Asia, followed by Europe and US. And the total export market share of Chinese chemical industry is about 13.5%, followed by, while India's share is about 2.3%. The largest exporters in the world are Europe, followed by US. So European and American chemical industry basically caters to export demand, and very high percentage of the industry is actually exported out of their respective regions. If you look at capital spending, the capital spending in China in 2018 was about $100 billion. China contributes about 45% of the total investment in chemical industry globally. So it is not only the largest market, the investments around the world are also almost $1 and $2 of investments in global chemical industry today is happening in China. Compared to that, the capital spending in US is about $35 billion. Capital spending in India is about $5 billion. So we have a long, long way to go before we can catch up to China. But it's also an opportunity for us because there is a big ocean of opportunity that lies in front of Indian chemical industry if you look at the relative sizes. The Chinese economy is ranked the second most attractive to multinational companies in 2017 to 19, only behind the US. So China is now the second largest recipient of foreign direct investment after United States. So it's very clear that China is an attractive market as well as an attractive investment destination. Next, we will spend some time on what the significant global industry trends are that we can see in the last couple of years. See, the most significant trend we can see is that the global oil and gas majors are now turning their sights on downstream chemical opportunities. Companies like Shell, Aramco, and who were earlier focused only on oil and gas have now realized that the profitability of oil and gas industry and the future of oil and gas industry is not as rosy as it was maybe a decade or so ago. So Shell has announced that they're going to spend about $3 to $5 billion annually on downstream chemical investments. Aramco recently merged with SABIC to diversify their oil and gas business into chemicals business. So this is likely to be the trend around the world for oil and gas companies. We can see that oil prices have collapsed. There is a big drop in demand of oil, and oil and gas companies that are solely reliant on oil and gas business are finding out that diversification is extremely necessary in the future scenario. Another major development that we have seen in the last 3 years is the Chinese chemical industry's adjustment to stricter environmental standards. We've seen many industry sectors such as pesticides, dyestuffs, where almost 40% of the companies have closed because of not following environmental standards. And that has provided opportunities for other makers in other parts of the world to breach into the gap left by the Chinese industry. So this is likely to be a trend to continue in China. China has about more than 670 chemical parks located all around the country, but not all chemical parks follow strict environmental standards. So China is doing a very, very serious cleaning up act. They want to reduce the number of chemical parks. They want to reduce them to parks that are following higher emission standards, higher environmental standards, higher safety standards. And so companies that cannot meet those standards are likely to close, and that process is likely to continue. The other trend that we can see is that many large multinationals like Dow, DuPont, AkzoNobel, they were earlier mix of businesses who have demerged several of their businesses to concentrate on core business. For example, Dow DuPont has separated into 3 companies, one focusing on agrochemicals, one on commodity chemicals, one on specialty chemicals. AkzoNobel divested their specialty chemical business and is purely focused on coatings and paint industry again. So this trend is also what we see in the last couple of years, that many of the large MNCs have decided to focus on their core business and divest non-core businesses. The other trend that we can also see is that in order to increase margins and bring operational efficiency, a lot of digital technologies are also being used, such as machine learning models. Autonomous vehicles are becoming more and more common for transportation. So these are technologies that multinationals believe can add about 3 to 5% in gross margins on an ongoing basis. So they are investing heavily in that. The other 2 trends that have come in the last 2 years is the trade conflict. See, the trade conflict erupted with Donald Trump announcing to the world that he is going after China with tariffs. And that came out of the blue. It was not anticipated beforehand, but it is now there for us to live with. And that is having a serious impact on supply chains based out of China. And it could potentially have benefits for countries around China and who were not able to compete with China before. The other important development that has happened now is COVID-19, which has no event such as COVID-19 has simultaneously produced a demand and supply shock to the whole world and global economy at the same time. And it has placed China in a corner because the world is looking at China for answers and world is looking for China at explanations. And so far, the world is not convinced. And there is a bit of a trust issue here. And people are, major countries around the world are wondering if we should trust China the way they were trusted them before. So I will concentrate on the last 2 points, the trade conflict and COVID-19, which have erupted on us in the last 2 years, and see what the impact of these two issues have been on Chinese industry, including chemical industry. If you look at the trade war originated with Donald Trump. Donald Trump's position on China has always been clear. He said that China is neither an ally nor a friend. They want to beat us and own us. And he has been saying that, and he has been quite consistent in this message. The problem that the United States has always expressed with respect to China is that China has always enjoyed a very huge trade surplus. The terms of business between US and China has not been based on reciprocity, where China extends the same business terms to US as US would extend to China. There is an issue with the legal code of China, where companies don't feel that they have the same level of protection, and particularly with respect to intellectual property rights, where US has consistently believed that transfer of intellectual property rights to Chinese partners have not been treated with the level of caution that it must be, and it has leaked to other companies, resulting in a serious loss of business. And also the Chinese government policy to favor local businesses, particularly the state-owned enterprises, to create local champions that have created a conflict with multinationals. Multinationals have always known these issues, but the size of Chinese markets have been too attractive for them to disturb the Chinese government. But a confluence of issues has come up now, where multinationals feel that it is no longer business as usual, and these issues need to be tackled. So the view is also gaining ground that China has become such an irreplaceable fulcrum for global economy that it is almost using that as a leverage to reshape geopolitics. Now, for America, the geopolitical implication with respect to the size of China has also posed a new challenge, because of which there is a view gaining ground that there needs to be a decoupling of supply chains between the West and China to some extent, in order to not to prevent the rise of China beyond a certain point where they can challenge America and the Western world. So this is the origin of the trade war conflict that originated in about 2017, 2018. So what has happened so far? So the trade war first started in about the beginning of 2018, and US slapped about 25% tariffs on about $34 billion of Chinese goods. And China immediately retaliated with equivalent tariffs on $34 billion of American goods. So there have been 4 rounds since April 2018, in August, September, and again in August 19 last year, where 34 billion followed by 16 billion, followed by the round 3, where US imposed around $200 billion of additional tariffs. But China could not retaliate because China does not import the same level of goods that America imports from China. So China retaliated with $60 billion. And in round 4 in August 2019, US imposed about $300 billion worth of tariffs, and China retaliated with $75 billion of goods. So finally, in about October 2019, they made an overall deal, what they called as phase 1 deal, where China has agreed to purchase about $200 billion of agricultural products of US over a period of 2 years. And they have agreed to strengthen the IP provisions, which they had previously not even recognized as an issue. So they have now said that they will strengthen IP provisions. And the other problem that America has is that China has been designated a currency manipulator, because the currency has been used, according to the US, as a tool to promote exports, and rather than being freely managed. So China has again has agreed that it will issue guidelines on how it manages its currency. So with that, in October 2019, they agreed on a phase 1 deal, but with all the existing tariffs. Just one minute. So in summary, China has placed tariffs on 550 billion of Chinese goods, and China has placed tariffs, US has placed tariffs on 550 billion of Chinese goods, and China has placed tariffs on 185 billion of US goods. The average US tariffs on imports from China today is about 19.3%. This is about 6 times higher than before the trade war started in 2018. So this is the order of magnitude of increase in tariffs that goods out of China are now experiencing, which is a big shock for many of the goods, where if you, with this kind of a margin tariff impact, it is probably wiping out their entire margin in the business. So there are more than 3,000 products that are included in this list, and the list includes several chemical products such as benzoic acid, titanium dioxide, propylene oxide, phenol, and so on. So there is a whole range of chemical products also impacted by these new tariffs that are happening already. But given the COVID situation, there is not much trade going on around the world. So the tariffs are not biting yet. But when the world resumes after COVID-19, we will see how the competitiveness of industries in China are going to be impacted by this. The immediate consequences are that the Chinese exports to US of goods that are slapped to tariff has declined by 14% by a total of about $18 billion in 2019. And US has suffered a bigger hit, with exports falling by 38% in 2019. The reason is that much of China's exports to US are niche products that cannot be supplied by other countries at similarly low cost. So even though America has increased tariffs on Chinese products, the American importers have no choice but to pay the higher tariff and import from China, because no alternate producers can be found around the world. So right now, duties of up to 25% now cover nearly half of American imports and 70% of Chinese imports from the US. If you look at the impact on chemical products, with the round 2, round 3, and round 4 of tariffs, about $27 billion of Chinese exports of chemicals and plastics are now impacted by tariffs. US imports about 39 billion of finished plastics, and of which about 6.7 billion are impacted by tariffs. So actually what has happened as a result of this is that even though US has imposed and started the practice of tariffs on China, the US chemical trade deficit with China has actually increased, which shows that America is not able to source alternate suppliers for the same products it has imposed tariffs, whereas China is probably able to secure alternate supply base. But the net result is that the US trade deficit, at least in the short term, actually increased from 1.4 billion to 4 billion in 2018. But there are certain other impacts which are going on with respect to reshoring and changes in supply chain as a consequence of the trade war. Those are interesting, and let's see what is going on. See, this is a ratio between total manufactured goods that US imports as a percentage of total domestic manufacturing. So what this shows is that for example, in 2019, for every dollar of manufacturing output from US imported $12.1 of manufacturing output from these 14 what are called Asian low-cost countries. So, however, what we can see as a direct result of trade war is that from 2018 to 2019, there is a sharp decline. So the US imports of manufactured goods from the 14 Asian low-cost countries has actually shrunk by 7.2%. And this contraction is almost exclusively driven by a collapse in imports from China, which has declined by 17%. So there is a direct and immediate impact of the trade war on Chinese exports to US. This is across all products, which we can see. There is a 7.2% decline. And if you see who is benefiting from these declines, see what this chart shows is that compared to 2018 imports from China into US, China lost about $90 billion of exports. And who has gained from this $90 billion of exports is about $31 billion is the other low-cost countries, which are Asian countries like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Taiwan, and so on. And about $13 billion is the gain from Mexico. So this is a direct impact, most likely directly a Chinese substitution impact, which has arisen out of the trade war. So And the rise of these imports have mainly occurred in product categories impacted by tariffs, and hence appears to have directly resulted from the trade war. If you look at the share of China imports into US, in 2014, almost 67% of all US imports from Asian low-cost countries was from China. This is in 2014. But what we can see is that from 2018 onwards, this has dropped by almost 10%. In 2019, this 67% has dropped to 56%. So the China share of total US imports, which is coming from Asian countries, Asian low-cost countries, the countries are listed here, which is China, Taiwan, Malaysia, India, Vietnam, Thailand, and so on, has dropped by almost 10 percentage points. So the trade war is really biting. So the impact of the trade war is immediate, and the trade war is not something that China can easily shrug off that easily. So what we can see is that there is a 10% drop, and this is actually migrating to several other countries which are benefiting from it. There was a study done by a Japanese investment bank, Nomura, where they studied immediately after the trade war was imposed. They studied which are the companies that have relocated their manufacturing out of China. So between April 2018 and August 2019, they studied that 56 companies had relocated their manufacturing production base out of China, out of which 3 companies went to India, 2 to Indonesia, but 26 went to Vietnam, and followed by Taiwan and 8 to Thailand. So what this shows is that the countries that are physical proximity to China, which is basically Vietnam and Taiwan, were able to receive 34 of those companies, 8 to Thailand, but only 2 companies came to Indonesia and 3 to India. So we can see that which are the countries which are readily benefiting from the reshoring happening out of companies that are moving their production bases out of China. See, China is today the world's factory, and it is not easy to move a production base when you have a complex mesh of supply chains where you have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers located all in the same country. And if you're going to move some part of the supply chain, then it is hard to maintain your links with your supply base if you're too far away, which is probably why it is easier to move to Vietnam, which is just next door, and Taiwan, than to move immediately to India and Indonesia, which are far away. There is also, according to estimates, according to several consulting firms which have studied this, that there is a production cost difference between Southeast Asian countries and India of about 10 to 12%. So there is a cost difference as well, which makes Southeast Asian countries and countries like Taiwan and Thailand much more attractive at this point in time. Next, let's see what is happening with the impact of COVID-19. See, in 2019, the growth in Chinese chemical industry was about 4.9%, and the growth in Indian chemical industry was about 3.2%. However, as a result of COVID-19 impact, where entire economies in the world have shut down, for the first time ever, IMF is predicting that the entire global economy is going to shrink by about 3% this year. And according to their estimates, only India and China are likely to escape negative growth. But if you look at Indian figures, and even in China so far, even that looks a little optimistic, but so far that is the estimate. China has already released their first quarter figures, and their economy has contracted by 6.8%. Similarly, Eurozone has contracted by 4%. So almost all the economies in the world are experiencing severe contraction, even though COVID took place only in around February and March. There is going to be a bigger hit in Q2 this year, which is April, May, June, where the contraction is going to be even more severe. And it looks like it's unlikely that we can make up that difference in the Q3 and Q4 this year, because economies are going to limp back to normal, and that is highly unlikely to happen. If we look at the COVID impact on Chinese industry, this is just a chart that explains the timeline of what really happened in China. See, between January and March, at the beginning of January, when China realized the seriousness of COVID in the Hubei province, the production shutdown started. And similarly, production shutdown started in the rest of China as well. Whereas outside of Hubei, they brought things under control by mid of February, and they slowly started increasing production. The production in Hubei province itself, shutdown has continued till the middle of March, and production has slowly started to inch back to normal. There has been a severe labor shortage as a consequence, and there has been no labor available at least until the middle of February. And by the middle of March, China now claims that they have solved the labor shortage problems, and labor is broadly now free to move within the country, and the factories are now almost back to normal. They had logistics constraints in January and February, lack of availability of transportation vehicles, availability of vessels, and so on. All those issues, they say, have been sorted out, and by the beginning of March, the transportation and logistics constraints have also been solved. However, the problem for industry is that even though the industry has started to resume back to normalcy, the demand is not there. So there is a big issue with respect to the behavior of people, consumption of people. And even though factories are starting to limp back to normal, the same level of orders and demand is not there, because of which companies, even though they have started to resume production, are having to seriously cut their output, which is leading to severe inventory issues in the supply chain. However, the Chinese government expects that in Q2, the domestic economy is expected to accelerate. But in Q2, around the world is shut down. So Europe is shut down, US is shut down, rest of the world is shut down. So while China is ready to start production in the March, there is really no global demand for China to produce to. So the global supply chain and demand recovery is expected to be anemic. So the Chinese production is basically for domestic consumption so far, right now. If you look at the impact on Chinese industry, the China's economy is broadly today made up of 58% of economy is domestic consumption. About 31% of the economy is investment, and about 11% is exports. The 58% consumption in the Chinese economy will take time to heal, because people are still wary of having the same consumption behavior that they used to have until a vaccine is found. So even though the economy is supposed to have limped back to normal, people are not having the same behavior. People are not taking planes. People are not going in public spaces where there are a lot of people. So restaurants, shopping malls are still not seeing the same level of people. So the consumption demand is likely to take quite a long time before people get the confidence to go and resume their consumption like before. So this is not likely to come back to the old levels very easily. 31% of Chinese GDP is basically infrastructure investments. So this is an opportunity for the Chinese government to pump in investments in infrastructure. And this they have always done in periods of crisis, where they have increased their investments in infrastructure, and this is likely to continue. Probably this will not be impacted so much. The 11% of Chinese economy, which is net exports, is at a serious risk because of collapse in global demand. There is no orders coming into Chinese industry from the world right now. And as a consequence of this, this is highly likely to not meet their last year's levels in 2020. If you just look at some of the major consuming sectors for chemical industry, such as automotive, home appliances, textile and clothing, and so on, we can see that in automotive industry, Chinese passenger car sales in January, February has collapsed by almost 45% compared to previous year. The Chinese passenger car sales growth expected for 2020 is minus 9%, which is a severe degrowth. Similarly, commercial vehicle sales is expected to have a degrowth of 1%. If you look at home appliances, which is a big source of consumption for plastics and so on, home appliances growth in January, February this year was minus 31%. And similarly, plastics production growth in January, February this year is minus 26%. So these are all severe numbers. And for Q1, there is a very, very sharp degrowth in several of the consumption industries, in fact, all the consumption industries. And hence, there is a glut in chemical products because the consumption industry's demand is not there. If you look at textile and clothing, the textile and clothing growth in January, February this year was minus 35%. And for the whole year, it is expected to degrow by minus 8%, which means that the demand is not likely to recover in Q2, Q3, Q4 to make up for the loss in Q1. So this is characteristic of any major industry where the loss of demand in Q1, it's probably not likely to be made up in Q2, Q3, and Q4. See, if you look at the impact on chemical products, there is a collapse in price of most chemical products because of poor demand from consumption industries such as auto, construction, textiles that we just saw. For example, jet fuel prices have collapsed. Nobody is flying. No planes are flying. There is no demand for jet fuel prices. Ethylene prices are at 10-year low. Polyester prices are at 4-year low. Methanol prices are at 4-year low. Europe has more than half of crude oil refining capacity running idle or running at a very low capacity now. In US, it is reported that 71 ethanol plants are idle and 70 more plants are running at very, very low capacity as demand has collapsed. Naphtha prices have crashed to 18-year lows because of collapse in crude oil prices. So across the board, plants are idling. BASF released a statement that their plants are operating at about 60% capacity. So there is a collapse in demand, collapse in prices, and across the board, quite a lot of plants are operating at low capacity, even though the plant may be back to normal levels of activity. However, there are some spots in the chemical industry where since January end, where demand is rising and prices are rising. These are very specific to certain products. For example, ethanol and isopropanol prices are soaring because of demand from hand sanitizers. Urea prices are rising because of non-availability from China and Iran. Face masks, personal protection equipment demand has soared through the roof, but multifold. I just read today that India is today the second largest producer of PPE, almost from zero. We are almost producing around 2.5 million kits a day. So polypropylene prices are rising on demand, and rising demand from these sectors. PET demand is holding strong because packaging demand is strong because of uses in sectors like hand sanitizers. Products which are required for disinfectants and surfactants, for soap and cleaning products, those are all not impacted so much. So these are small pockets in chemical industry where there are still good demand and good prices that are being seen, but this is just too small. Then US National Retail Federation says that the severe contraction continues in Q4, and they see only a likelihood of a gradual upturn in the fourth quarter. So there is no big demand recovery that US sees. And the National Retail Federation forecast is very important because 70% of US GDP is made of consumption. So if US consumption doesn't drive supply chains around the world, there isn't any other consuming country in the world that can make up for lost demand from the United States. Even in Europe, the consumer confidence is an all-time low. Industrial sentiment index is at extreme pessimism. So basically, we are now at the worst situation in terms of both demand and supply caused by COVID-19. Even if the demand is, even if the recovery, which people say is U-shaped, where after the sharp decline, there is likely to be a period of stabilization and then the demand gradually coming back, many economists predict that demand may not return back before 2022, which means even in 2021, we are not likely to see the demand that we saw in 2019. As a consequence, both chemical and oil markets are very heavily oversupplied. So companies, for example, in oil and gas industry, there has been a spate of announcements of capex reduction. So capital expenditure has been slashed across the board because there is no demand for capital expenditure. There is no demand for drilling. There is no demand for drilling rigs. This is likely to happen even in the chemical industry, where companies are likely to relook at their capex and see which sectors are likely to be oversupplied for the next 2 years and probably cut their capex in the coming quarters. So post-COVID-19, there is a very big China dilemma. So we are seeing headlines like this around the world. So for example, why is the US so ridiculously dependent on China? See, there is now a realization in the US that in a time of epidemic and a time of crisis, that US cannot even make a face mask for itself. You cannot even make a hand sanitizer for itself. It cannot even make basic products for itself. So you are a number one largest economy in the world, not even making basic products for your own basic security. So that level of realization has happened in US, in Europe, and many countries within Europe are also realizing that this is a very serious situation. So we are all very, very highly dependent both for material goods from China as well as China as a market. So US is making all sorts of noises saying that we want to take supply chains out of China. We want to de-risk our supply chains from China. Same sentiments are also coming from Europe. Already some countries have started to act. For example, Japan has announced that it is spending $2.2 billion as a fund to help companies exit China. They have not said where, but Japan doesn't want certain industries where it doesn't want to be very, very dependent on China. So they've said that we will bear the cost of moving the industry out of China, and they have allocated a budget of $2.2 billion. Spain, Italy, Germany, for example, have changed their FDI laws because suddenly now in Europe and US, companies are available at distressed valuations. The stock markets have collapsed for many of the stock prices have collapsed for many of the companies. Companies are now available at much cheaper valuations than what they were. And Europe and US, Europe is fearing that these companies are going to be snapped up by Chinese companies at a much, much lower and distressed valuations. And they have started erecting protectionist measures. India has also announced the same, where India has said that any investment coming from China will now not be an automatic investment, and it will now be subject to cabinet approval. So many countries are doing the same in order to protect themselves from Chinese investments. The problem is with moving supply chains out of China is that in many industries, which is chemical, automotive, high-tech, pharmaceutical, any manufacturing industry, nearly all supply chains lead to China. As COVID-19 broke out, companies started realizing the dependence on Wuhan province as well as China. It is reported that a consulting company came up with an estimate that about 51,000 companies around the world were having more than 1 or 2 direct suppliers in Wuhan. And about 5 million companies had about tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers and dependency on Wuhan and rest of China. So this shows that any small shock in Wuhan has a reverberation around the world and across so many companies. That is the level of dependency. So as a consequence, Apple, for example, realized that it could suddenly not manufacture phones and other products. So their assembler, OEM assembler called Wistron, who's an assembler of iPhones, has already announced that it will move about 50% of the capacity out of China because they don't want to be 100% dependent on China, and they want to diversify their supply chain. So this is likely to be the sentiment, certainly for higher value products. For lower value sectors like garments, there has already been a diversification to Vietnam, Bangladesh, and so on, because the Chinese labor costs have now become far, far higher than what they used to be. And so they're no longer competitive. But higher value sectors will find it very hard to make a clean break, partly also due to supplier dependencies. Because supply chain is not just about moving one company out, but it's moving your entire supply base out. And that is not very easy. It's very easy to move an assembler out, but if your entire supply base is still located in China with all your component tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 manufacturers, it is very difficult to be away from there until you move everybody out. However, what we can say is that some of the trends seem inevitable. See, we don't know the full extent of the economic trauma that coronavirus is going to bring about because the pandemic is still ongoing. But companies will be compelled to go much further in rethink their strategies just beyond lowest cost. There is no competition even today to China, where world-class infrastructure being provided at that cost. There is nobody in the world who can provide that level of infrastructure at that cost. So if cost is the only consideration, it's very hard to beat China. However, companies will be inclined to spread their risks to avoid too much dependency on China. The threat of fewer crises will also compel companies to restructure their supply chain in order to be more resilient. What this means is that it is not just cost, but it's cost plus risk plus resilience, which is likely to lead to companies making the decisions on supply chains. The risk has also increased in the form of tariffs and trade policies that US trade war has brought about, where US is probably what they're trying to do with the trade war is simply increase the cost of doing business in China. And that cost, as we saw before, is already showing impact in terms of exports out of China to US. See, we will just see maybe summarize some of the key factors that China has always been attractive to Western companies for. See, one of the most important reasons is that of course, for a lot of investment, you need to have capital available. See, in early 2000s and mid 2010s, there was plenty of capital available around the world and at a very low cost of borrowing. So these large swathes of investment capital were available across many nations and that were easily deployed across borders, and they found their home in China. But it's now going to be a challenge after post-COVID, because even though companies want to move, their balance sheets are going to be in a very bad shape. How much surplus they have and how much they have to reinvest out of China into other countries is a question to be seen. In terms of competitiveness, China has invested like no other country in development of infrastructure, whether it's roads, whether it's ports, whether it's airports, whether it's dedicated chemical parks, which China has more than 600 dedicated chemical parks compared to, let's say, for example, around 30 in Germany. This level of infrastructure that China provides, no other country can provide so far. So competitiveness of manufacturing in China is very hard to beat. In terms of regulatory environment, China has done a lot of changes in making China very attractive in terms of financial incentives in the form of tax breaks, export subsidies, loans, very sector specific financial packages, very even company specific financial packages, in order to make companies come to China and be attracted to Chinese investment. In contrast, for example, OECD today ranks India as the 8th most restrictive FDI regime. And today, India is ranked as having one of the most restricted trade regimes amongst 86 leading countries. So it is very difficult for India with the current FDI regime and trade regime to compete with China to the same level in attracting from the regulatory point of view. And three more factors that have always been important for global multinationals has always been stability, which is political stability. In the case of China and, for example, Vietnam, authoritarian countries, once you make a deal with the government, you are not likely to find many other hindrances to doing business later on. They don't have to fight with Chinese justice system, or they don't have to find any other issues other than making sure that they are on the right side of the Chinese government. However, there are new issues that have come up, even in the stability, such as Hong Kong. Now, investments in Hong Kong, for example, Hong Kong has been a very large importer of investments in the past. And now that looks like that is in very big trouble because of the political problem for independence between Hong Kong and China. And of course, one of the biggest issues why companies go to China is because of the size of the Chinese market. The sheer size of the Chinese market makes it a very attractive nation for investors to commit capital. Because China today is the second largest economy, and China's per capita income is almost 5 to 6 times that of India. So the buying power of China and the Chinese middle class also makes China the world's largest market for many consumer goods. So the sheer size of Chinese population and the Chinese demand makes it imperative for global businesses to have manufacturing and operate in China. And China's openness to regional and international trade improved dramatically after they joined WTO. And they enjoyed very favorable trade relations with the world for about 20 years until the US-China trade war has started. So now the rising tariffs make it less attractive for several products because of the reasons that we have seen just now. So some of the factors which were very conducive in China attracting FDI are no longer the case. For example, stability is a problem. Regional international trade is a problem. And the business climate also in China is not looking very good in terms of hostility towards Western countries that we can see between several governments in the West and China. So we have to see how this is going to play out. But some of the factors which are very easy in the last 20 years doesn't look like it is going to be the same in the ongoing years. See, with this as a background, I think in the last couple of months, we have seen a lot of clamor coming from overseas multinationals who are contacting several countries. Several countries are also changing their laws in order to attract investments. The world can see that there are many companies that want to get out of China. So there is a severe competition that's building up. Thailand is doing a lot. Indonesia is doing a lot. Everybody is frantically changing laws and making their conditions attractive in order to attract investments that are likely to flow out of China. So India has also started thinking along the same lines, and several actions are happening. We are seeing several headlines virtually on a daily basis now. And some of the actions that are going on are that it is now at the highest level of Prime Minister's level, where Prime Minister held a meeting with the states last week on attracting investments. He held a meeting with the states and asked all the states to come up with a comprehensive plan to fast track investments. Several states have independently announced that they are dealing with investor companies from around the world who are contacting them Andhra Pradesh has announced that they are in touch with companies from Japan, US, and so on. And they say that they are talking about their ready-made industrial parks, their availability of long coastline. And they say that they want to attract IT, food processing, chemicals industries. UP is also rapidly setting up committees to deal with this. Uttar Pradesh recently announced the chief minister had a conference call with more than 100 MNCs from US. And Uttar Pradesh has a planned defense corridor along with Tamil Nadu. And Uttar Pradesh wants to attract investments in aerospace and defense industries in the proposed defense corridor. And the chief minister has asked the industries minister and the cabinet to come up with a spate of incentives and subsidies based on their discussions with the government and see how far they can do in order to lay a red carpet for investors from US. So we can see that the state governments are aware of this. They are acting on this. Now the question is on execution and how far they come up with policies that can satisfy and convince the investors of the speed and sincerity of the response. Tamil Nadu has also announced that they're setting up a committee. The chief minister has announced to look into schemes that can be offered for attracting investment. So far, there has not been a particular offer made, but a committee has reportedly been set up and looking into this, and hopefully we should see some results soon. The Indian government has announced that it is identifying land for ready use for investment. Land has always been the biggest problem and frustrated several extremely high-profile projects. We remember the DMIC, the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, where we had signed a joint agreement with Japan to develop almost 24 cities between Delhi and Mumbai as an industrial corridor. That didn't take off at all, primarily because of land acquisition reasons. That whole project has not happened. That has been a very big sore point with respect to Japan. POSCO was a very high profile, extremely large investment project where the project collapsed because of not being able to acquire land. Even the Saudi Aramco project, which is supposed to come up in Maharashtra with a large refinery, is also getting bogged down and frustrated by land issues. So in the past, investments in India have required the investors to go and acquire land on their own. Now the government is saying that they are identifying land for ready investment, and Government of India, according to at least newspaper headlines, is that almost 460,000 hectares of land is being in the process of being identified, which is going to be given for ready use to investors, where investors don't have to go and acquire land, but the land will be given. The government has identified 10 industries which they want to focus on, which is electrical, pharmaceutical, medical devices, electronics, heavy industry, solar equipment, food processing, chemicals, and textiles. So these are at least the stated industries that Government of India says they want to attract investment in this time. And Invest India, which is our central body, which facilitates investment with overseas investors, says it has received inquiries from Japan, US, and South Korea. So the government has, in the process of working out a detailed scheme for attracting investments, and hopefully we should see something by the end of the month. And based on the quality of the proposals, we can see how good it is and how far we will be able to make progress. In addition to all this, India has also been doing a couple of actions in the last year, which have also been a severe problem stated by investors. One is our corporate tax. Our corporate tax has always been far higher than the corporate tax of competing countries in Southeast Asia. Last year's India's reduction of corporate tax from 25% to 15% for new manufacturing companies should make India extremely competitive and is definitely on par or even lower than some of the Southeast Asian countries. We still need to go a long way in corporate tax reform, but this is certainly a very, very big step in making new investments in India attractive, certainly on tax front with respect to when compared to Southeast Asian countries. The other severe problem that has always been mentioned by investors and for investors in India is the labor reform. See, Government of India has decided to amalgamate. We have 44 labor codes from, I don't know how many decades ago, which have not been reformed at all. So the government has collapsed the 44 labor codes into 4 labor codes, which is wages, industrial relations, social security and safety, and health and working conditions. The government passed the wages code in Parliament in August last year, and the other 3 codes are in front of Parliamentary Standing Committee for approval. If it gains the approval, the government plans to pass all these other 3 codes in the Parliament in 2020 And this should represent our single biggest labor reform that we have tried and we will pass probably in our history since independence. So if this labor reform passes and the 4 codes pass, hopefully with all the stakeholders satisfied, this should certainly improve the situation from where we are. Some of the other problems with respect to overseas investors in India are that we have cancelled some of the bilateral investment treaties that we used to have, such as SECA, which is the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement with Singapore, where Singapore used to be the route for, along with Mauritius, for much of the overseas investments that used to come. And these treaties used to provide several investor guarantees to the investors. Now, today, foreign investors are restrained from approaching international tribunals for dispute resolution, and they also don't have the protection that they used to have under these kind of bilateral agreements. This has made a lot of foreign investors very, very nervous in the absence of these protections. There are several changing rules of businesses as well, which have been very high profile and extremely negative in terms of headlines for Indian industry. For example, in telecom industry, Vodafone is one of the largest FDI investors in India across the industries. And ever since the rules of the industry were changed with the entry of Reliance Jio, Vodafone has lost virtually all its investments. And in fact, in one quarter last year, they reported loss of about $7 billion. Now, this has dealt a very, very negative headline to the country in terms of the attractiveness of investment, and especially in regulated sectors like telecom, where changes in rules and lack of stability of rules has rendered extremely expensive investments futile. Even in e-commerce, after a very large investment made by Walmart and Flipkart, the policies were changed, much to the unhappiness of investors, but they've agreed to go on. But this kind of fundamental rule changes after large investments are very, very negative for the country. For example, even the unilateral cancellation of contracts. Andhra Pradesh government had a very large contract with Singapore government for development of Amaravati city, where a lot of government bodies in Singapore, government agencies were involved in the project. They had made an enormous amount of investment, but with the change of government, the project has been cancelled. So these kind of cancellations and these kind of changes in business rules give companies very, very, make them very nervous and want to think about the reliability of investment in the country. So there needs to be a fresh rethink on this, and the government needs to figure out how some of these investment areas can be brought under protection, either under international arbitration for satisfying their genuine concerns, and protecting them from retrospective changing rules of business. These are some of the things that need to be done in order to assuage investor concerns and risks, which makes India a difficult place to do business from a foreign investor point of view. So these are some of the points I wanted to cover with respect to what is happening in China and the likely impact on India, and the things that Indian industry needs to worry about and the government is looking at in order to attract investments. So thank you very much. And with that, I hand over to Mr. Ilanahai again.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Swaminathan. I think nobody else could have made such a nice presentation. You have covered all the points. And I think all industries, not only chemical industries, will be benefited from this. And we will take it, your valid points, and we will also take it through ICC and CAI to the central government. And we will also meet the state government agencies and give this presentation, which will be very useful for them. Thank you very much, Mr. Swaminathan. And whatever the questions come, we will forward to you, because we may not have much time to discuss more, but we will take it with you and give the explanation to the our friends in CAA. And now Mr. Venkataraman is going to deliver his talk. Mr. Venkataraman is known to all of us. He was the former secretary of CAA, and he worked both in the industry as well as the consultancy field for the last 4 or 5 decades. And everybody knows in Tamil Nadu, Nandini Venkataraman. He is not only a consultant, but he has done a lot of work for the social welfare thing, and many people know about it, and no introduction is required for Mr. Venkataraman. Over to Mr. Venkataraman now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ilanahai, for the complimentary words, which I only hope I deserve. And after listening to Swaminathan's talk, which he has, I think it's at a fairly towering height, I'm going to restrict myself to talk about Indian scenario. And he ended with a lot of hopes. All of us hope that his expectations and with regard to change of government policies, programs, and proactive policies of the government will all fructify to make the Indian chemical industry forward. But I would like to take some ground realities with regard to the Indian chemical industry, which may not be very flattering, which only highlights the challenges ahead of us in reaching our targets. If one would look at the Indian chemical industry, take a holistic view over the last 1 decade or so, one cannot but come to a conclusion that the Indian chemical industries are really nearly stagnant. This has been so. Of course, there have been a lot of new projects have come up. New capacity expansions have taken place. Of course, there have also been some closures of the units. Overall, what we find here is Indian industries are not able to meet the demand in India itself. The manufacturing capacities are not being built. As a result, when demand is going up, when Indian chemical industries are not able to build the capacity to exploit the domestic market, inevitably India has become a net importer of chemicals. There are very, very few chemicals that are not imported in India in small or large quantity. And the fact here is that India becoming a net importer of chemicals really indicate that India has been unable to build up the capacity to the required level. That is what we call as near stagnancy in Indian chemical industry. Now, having said that there's a near stagnancy, let us go on to prove it. Let us give some case studies. In India, what really has happened is not only the chemical industries are not coming up, but there are a number of cases of existing chemical industries being closed to the extent that there is no nil production in India. And there are also some cases where the chemical industries have closed and they have started importing the product, using it for captive purposes partly, and then start becoming a trader. In which case, otherwise means some manufacturers have converted themselves partly into trading. This is not a flattering situation. Let us see the case study. There is a product known as vinyl ester monomer. There were 2 units which were producing in the country. Both of them were substantially using it for captive purposes. They use for adhesives and all that. Both of them stopped the production. The production was stopped around more than 15 years back. No efforts have been made to build another VAM plant in India today. Indian imports of VAM is right now touching around 1.5 lakh tons per annum. Then they take another case of another product that is called styrene. There was a plan for operating styrene in India, which was closed 2 decades back. For the last 2 decades, no efforts have been put up to set up another styrene plant in India. Indian present import of styrene is well over 2 lakh tons per annum. Then we take another case study of citric acid. There are 3 units which are producing citric acid in India. Citric acid is made from starch or cane molasses, which are reasonably adequately available in India. All the 3 units are closed down. There is no citric acid production in India today. India is importing 81,000 tons of citric acid per annum, and the demand is steadily going at about 7 to 8% per year. What do you think of this? If it is not a stagnation. Now let's look at the stagnation from another point of view. There are a lot of products, many products, which are in good demand in the country, which the products are not being produced at all in India. No efforts have been made to put up the facility for production of these units. Let us take the first L-lysine, Lysine. This is made from cane molasses or starch. This L-lysine is one of the very important additives for the poultry feed. And poultry is for sustainability for India. It is also used in pharmaceuticals. No apparent pattern has been put up. In spite of the fact, starch or molasses is available here in India, and India is now importing 65,000 tons of L-lysine per annum, mainly from China, and the import level is going out 7 to 8% per year. Let us take another product. There is a product called polyacetol, which is an engineering plastic, and its steadily import is going up. It's used in auto components, several other vital areas. The raw material for the production of this polyacetol is only formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is adequately produced in India. Nobody is taking any steps to put up polyester plant. I don't know, it beats me. I don't know why nobody is thinking. Let's take another product, polycarbonate. Polycarbonate is again an engineering plastic used extensively in the construction and other sector. Indian import is now more than 1.8 lakh tons per annum. No plant has come up in India. Very eco-friendly technologies have been developed for polycarbonate, avoiding use of phosgene. The technologies are in commercial operation elsewhere in Japan and all that. No efforts have been put up for the country. So this is again, if this is not stagnation, what it is? You have a market, huge market, growing, developing market. We are not putting capacities. Let us look at this stagnation from another point of view. There are plants, one or two plants operating in the country, which have been, and first, for example, take the case of rutile grade titanium dioxide. Titanium dioxide is produced by ilmenite, which is the basic raw material in the mineral ore. India has got 150 million tons of ilmenite ore, which constitutes around 12% of the total world reserves of ilmenite. Now, in spite of this, only plant that was put up a rutile grade titanium dioxide was in 1990. For the last 30 years, nobody has put up another rutile grade titanium dioxide plant in India. And the capacity of the plant, which originally was 30,000 tons per annum, is now still, even now, is operating only at 30 or 35,000 tons per annum. No significant capacity expansion has taken place. Meanwhile, since the titanium dioxide used in the highly growth-oriented areas like paint, paper, textile, polymer, import is going up. India is importing 2 lakh tons of titanium dioxide every year, and it is going up at 8 to 9% per year. No steps have been taken to put up a titanium dioxide plant. We take the case of another plant, acetic acid. There is only one acetic acid unit operating in India. Earlier, number of acetic acid units were operating based on ethanol. But since ethanol in India prefers more for human consumption rather than for industry, that most of the ethanol-based acetic acid units were closed down. Now this one plant which is producing acetic acid from ethanol is operating, and it has been in operation for about 15 years. It has not expanded the capacity. Now today, Indian import of acetic acid is 8 lakh tons per annum. It is going up steadily. So many other cases can be readily pointed out to you to show that India is not exploiting its market potential. If this is not stagnation, what it is? Now let us go to the next question. If it is stagnation, why is it stagnation? See, prescription should always be preceded by diagnosis. So let us know what is the reason why India is stagnating. Number one point is the technology. Indian technology base is still very weak. Those scientists won't like to permit this. I like to allow to say this. Every chemical product being put up in India, at least 90% of them are today based on overseas technology. India has got more than 25 urea plants. Now the government of India is taking steps to revive 4 or 5 urea plants. For all the urea plants, we are taking technology from abroad. Why are we taking technology from abroad? Having had 25 urea units in operation, can't we put up a urea unit ourselves? And it's all taken from small countries like Italy, Taiwan, and all that. When small countries do, why we are not doing it in India? Now, what is the reason for the low technology? You can't blame government of India for this. Government of India has been pumping several thousand crores of rupees year after year after year for the last several decades in setting up and operating the CSIR labs, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. A chain of laboratories are available. Most of the money given by the CSIR labs are spent towards wages and salaries. That doesn't mean government of India is spending less money. Government of India is spending adequate money to develop its capability. The problem here is the CSIR is not able to generate funds to the level required by developing commercially exploitable technologies. And Indian entrepreneurs today lack confidence in the domestic technology. And CSIR, they have bright spots. I'm not condemning the unit or criticizing the unit beyond the level, but they are not living up to the expectations or need of the country by way of domestically acceptable, internationally competitive technologies. Okay, forget about the government. What about the private sector? Why not money that is spent by the private sector, including the pharmaceutical units, in the real R&D laboratory functions are minuscule. In the cases of many R&D laboratories, I know from personal experience, they're all operating as glorified quality control laboratories. They're all operating as troubleshooting plants. They're not doing for basic research. Very few R&D labs in India have come out with original research projects. Okay, forget about the private sector also. What about the universities? There are many of them, including IITs. Government of India is spending huge money to fund the research program of IIT professors from universities. How many universities have come with the commercially exploitable projects? You can count them. So there is a technology crisis. It is high time we admit it and find out how to overcome this issue, number one. Number two, there is a severe mindset problem amongst the Indian chemical industry, entrepreneurs in the private sector. Now, this has been recognized. This has been admitted. Without admitting this, recognizing this ground reality, we can't move forward, even if it is going to displease some people. Now, what is really happening here is Indian private sector organizations are mostly family-centric. We all know this. So when they conceive a project, think of a project, even as they think of the project, conceive the project, they also think about how much is it for me, my daughter-in-law, son-in-law, son, daughter, nephew, niece, how much they are going to get. Will I be able to protect the interests of these people? So they want to hold full equity share in the company or majority equity share in the company, so they control the venture. This mindset is mainly because of the family-centric. You don't think companies like BASF or DuPont or Dow being run on the basis of the family-centric concept. It's a highly professional management. So when we don't have technology in India, for setting up projects, we had to go abroad for getting a technology. The earlier days, when there was a restriction in the imports, there was a WTO restrictions were not there. Companies from abroad found they wanted to give a technology. Without giving technology, they cannot enter India. Now there's no more question. Now anybody can sell in India. You can have a plant in Philippines or Thailand and Vietnam and sell the product in India. So there's no compelling need for them to enter into India to set up project to exploit the Indian market base. So what happens here is, when you ask for technology from abroad, they inevitably say, give me a control of the company. Give me some 70% equity or 60% equity, let me control the company. And our entrepreneurs are not willing. There are a number of dealings with the multinational companies in the particular chemical sector, which I know from personal experience by interaction. They have collapsed, agreements have collapsed, they were not able to take forward simply because of the mindset of the entrepreneur, possessive mindset of the entrepreneurs in India that they don't want to give controlling shares. So the companies have withdrawn. Now the problem in India today is we don't have technology. We don't have enough money for international to set up plans for international capacities and all that. When you don't have money, when you don't have technology, you have to necessarily admit the situation and go ahead, get the international technologies and international investment and do whatever the adjustments that we need to make. That we are not making, that is the number one problem. So basically today, let us understand, India is having a crisis of confidence with regard to technology and mindset of the entrepreneur. This has to undergo a fundamental change. Now, there are certainly a number of multinational companies who are evincing interest, as Mr. Swaminathan has said, and they want to Vietnam. Many people wonder, people are going to Vietnam, people are going to Taiwan, people are going to Thailand. They are not coming to India in the same way. There are hundreds of reasons for this. Corrective measures are required. Now, given this scenario, what is the way out for India? Given these type of technology constraints. See, here there are two things. So we have been talking gloriously about China. There are plenty of things to learn from China. There are equally plenty of things to learn and unlearn from China. Around 40 years back, when China was in a similar position like India, where technology was not available, investment was not there, entrepreneurial mindset was extremely inadequate, Chinese government realized that to take a big leap forward in China, they have no alternative other than depending on multinational companies. So they threw open the economy to the multinational companies, invited them. Multinational companies, most of them are based in US or Europe or China or South Korea. Their main constraint is their constrained market in those regions. So they're desperately looking for market to expand the operation. Who is better than China or countries like India? So when China offered this, initially there could have been some suspicion because of the background of China, but China went out of the way to prove and convince the entrepreneurs that you come to China, we'll protect you, and they have protected them. Multinational companies operating in China today are extremely satisfied and happy. For example, BASF, which have been in China for over 20 years, now they have said that their investment in China will touch around 20 billion US dollars, 20 billion US dollars by 2020. That's what they have announced. If it's a dissatisfied BASF, they would not have done this. And now in China, the industrial structure is threefold. One is the state-owned enterprises. Second is what we call the domestic private sector. And third is the multinational companies. The gap between the domestic private sector and multinational companies are narrowing down because several multinational companies are now forming joint venture with Chinese companies, with public sector companies and private sector companies. So here, the definition of multinational companies operating in China is no more the same definition that was given 20 years back. And it is a joint sector venture. It is partly owned by multinational company, partly owned by Chinese companies. Now, in the process of this kind of thing, what has happened was several technology, when multinational companies come and set up projects in China, they have to necessarily come with not only investment with regard to technology. They have to employ scientists, Chinese scientists, they have to employ Chinese laborers, Chinese executives. In the process, technology gets leaked out. And then inevitable, this is inevitable in the case of the multinational companies also know this. When this happened, it is a tribute to the Chinese private sector. They have made use of the available technology for the multinational companies exceptionally well and started developing. Today, the private sector companies in China are on par with multinational companies in certain respect. They're giving a run for the money for multinational companies, and they are in a position to compete with the multinational companies, not only in China, but around across the world. This is the tribute that has to be given. The mistake, what I said, there is something that you have to unlearn from China. What you have to unlearn from China is 40 years back, in a desperate hurry to promote investments, Chinese government allowed all and sundry to set up projects. So projects came uneconomic size, poor technology, lack of competitive shop floor practices, environmental issues. Many companies come. When so many companies came, and I know because my contact with China, at least one entrepreneur told me there, we have not done a market study, so we took it for granted and put ahead with this because China is a huge market. Without even conducting a market study, many Chinese companies came into the picture. When it happened, a huge overcapacity utilization happened in China. So much overcapacity utilization became embarrassing for the government of China and the industries in China. And China is now applying corrective measures. Smaller companies are being closed down. Uneconomic capacities are being closed down. They are putting huge restrictions on environmental issues. China doesn't mind because it has so much overcapacity. Today in China, methanol is operating at 60% capacity utilization. Average capacity utilization of many other industries in China is now not more than 55-60%. That doesn't reflect on Chinese capabilities. It only reflects on the past overcapacity buildup. This is precisely something which we should avoid copying. That is, anxiety to go fast, anxiety to become a big industry house. Let us not be indiscriminate in setting up projects. Then what to do? How to do it? I'll give you 3 case studies. Number 1, identify projects that are of importance to India, that are of interest to multinational companies, where the interests of both multinational companies and India will merge together, and identify those projects, promote these projects very selectively. I'll give you some case studies now. Take the case of titanium dioxide, about which I discussed. India imports 2 lakh tons, we got 150 billion tons of titanium dioxide. Now, with titanium dioxide, why don't we invite multinational companies? Because demand, the gap is around 2 lakh tons per annum. It's going up 7%. It's a huge market base for them. Construction, automobile sector is growing, increasing the paint production very much. And paint production is increasing, galloping at a high level. Given this scenario, multinational companies, some very strong tier producers, which I can't name at this time, which I know, they are willing to invest in India, but they want 100% equity or 80% equity. Now that equity we have to give it up. There's no alternative. You have no technology, you have no money, but you have only resources, you have demand base. Ask them to come. There is no loss of prestige in this. That is what we have to do. Take the case of another case. Now, methanol. I told you India imports 20 lakh tons of methanol per year. Huge quantity. It is going up at 8% per year. Now, in India, there are 5 or 6 methanol plants in operation, of which only 2 or 3 partly, I say 2 or 3 because third unit is partly operating. Only 2 or 3 units are operating. All the other methanol plants will close down. There is no likelihood of being restarting them at all. The reason is they are all based on natural gas. India's 45 to 50% of natural gas is being made by import. And India has to necessarily get the natural gas from countries like Qatar or Kuwait or Iran or Saudi Arabia. Now, what is happening there is, in the case of Iran or in the Saudi Arabia, natural gas is just available under the ground. And there is no tax on this in Iran. So in case we want to get the natural gas from Iran, because 70% of Indian methanol is now made by Iran, they have to liquefy the natural gas there, bring it to India, then regasify it and transport it. So the cost of natural gas available for an Indian domestic producer of methanol is 1.4 times more than the cost of natural gas available for a producer in Iran. Given this fact, that these Indian methanol units just cannot compete with the methanol units in Iran. So 70% of the Indian requirement of methanol is made by countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, what is the way out? Then go and examine, is there any other way of producing methanol apart from natural gas? There are ways. For example, in Canada, they are producing methanol from municipal solid waste, MSW. That is available plenty in India. They take the municipal solid waste, they subject it to fermentation, get the synthesis gas out, and they are producing methanol. Netherlands government, highly impressed with the efforts of this Canadian company, they have taken a decision now to put up a methanol plant based on municipal solid waste in Netherlands. They have formed a consortium of several companies. And idea is to get the waste utilization and also avoid the problem of handling the municipal solid waste they are going to get from different countries. Feasibility studies are going on. India is importing 20 lakh tons per annum of methanol. The capacity of the Canadian unit for producing methanol is 50,000 tons of municipal solid waste. Why don't we put some 25 or 30 methanol plants in India? We've got municipal solid waste everywhere in the country. Put one plant in Calcutta, one plant in Mumbai, one plant in Indore, one plant in Trichy, or somewhere else. You can do it. Why not be doing it? See, these are obvious opportunities because the Canadian company is looking for opportunities to expand their technology base. If a proper, well-tuned invitation goes them and the proper offer is made, they will come. And I see an important thing about a product like methanol and ethanol is they are very strong building blocks. If you have enough capacity in methanol, 35 to 40 important derivative products can be put up based on methanol. And this will put a chain of development. So is the case of ethanol. And methanol has a lot of other applications like fuel. China, they are using methanol for running the vehicles now. There are so many other options. Now let us go to the third case study. India is now the net importer of crude oil. India is importing around 240 to 250 million tons of crude oil. I repeat, 240 to 250 million tons of crude oil. Indian production of crude oil is just hardly around 30 million tons. There is no feasibility of increasing the production of crude oil in the foreseeable future in India because of lack of development efforts and a variety of issues involved in developing it. It can go up, not really significant. Then what to do now? Find out alternate source for fuel. Appropriate to India. Alternate source for fuel appropriate to India is the algae, which we call in Tamil kadalpasi. This algae has got around 25 to 40% or even more of oil, depending on the species of algae. Now, what is required to cultivate algae? Only sunshine and carbon dioxide. We've got sunshine all over India. We've got carbon dioxide all over India. Every cement plant, every power plant is emitting huge quantity of the carbon dioxide. Now, another very important thing about algae is algae does not need clean water. Dirty water is enough for algae. And it can be cultivated in wasteland. India has got 63 million hectares of wasteland. I repeat, 63 million hectares of wasteland, which consists of soil with salinity or marshland and all this. Why don't we set up some 100 or 120 algae plants? So what happens in algae is, first you cultivate algae. The cultivation time is hardly 30 days. So take the algae, squeeze it, get the oil out. When you get the oil out of algae, subject the oil to transfer esterification, and then it can be used as a diesel. Now next, after squeezing the oil out of the algae, you have got biomass. Subject the biomass to anaerobic digestion. When you do it, methane gas comes. Methane is nothing but natural gas. Use the methane gas to produce power. So in 1,000 acres of algae crop area, we can produce 20,000 kiloliters of algae oil, which will be converted to diesel, and 4 megawatt of power. It's an extremely good idea. And why not we put up 25 or 30 plants around the country? And when you grow the algae farm, it boosts the agricultural operation very significantly. And India is becoming increasingly water stressed. Here is a friendly product like algae. It doesn't want good water. It wants only sunshine. It wants carbon dioxide, which all of us want to get out of it. And why not we do this? And my estimation is around 1,000 acres of land to produce 20,000 kiloliters of fuel and 4 megawatt of power will cost less than 150 crores. I propose we have made a complete study on this, submitted to the government of India. Nothing seems to be moving right now. So these are all options. So what I'm trying to stress here is, don't go for indiscriminate creation of capacity just like China did, where you have no advantage. You go for plants where India has got a specific strategic advantages, for which I gave you 3 examples. Probably I can give you another 15 or 20 examples like this. Ultimately, the ground reality is we need to admit. Now, whether it is algae, where the huge efforts have gone in America to set up algae plants, commercial algae plants in operation in America, and as an experimental model, one aircraft has filled it itself with algae biofuel instead of aviation fuel, ran around 8 hours just to prove the algae has merits, it can be used. commercial plants have come up in algae, and we have a lot of companies are doing a lot of research on algae. Many people are willing to cooperate with India. All that is required is a concerted effort by the government of India and the Indian entrepreneurs to go and get technology for production of methanol from municipal solid waste, make algae fuel and power from algae biofuel, get used your enormous resource of ilmenite to produce titanium dioxide. I'm giving you only a few case studies because of time constraint. Now, given this basic scenario, what is needed in India is admit that we don't have technology. Admit that in the foreseeable future, we are not going to get develop technology to a level of international standards to put a competitive project. Admit that you don't have enough investment capacity. Admit we have no alternative other than getting overseas companies to come to India and set up the thing. This is exactly what China did. This is exactly what we need to do. I only hope that the government of India, state government, will realize the ground reality. There are a lot of issues in India, no doubt about it. There is corruption in India. Which country does not have corruption? I'm not justifying corruption, but China is a very corrupt country. If you know Thailand, if you know Vietnam, there are issues are no less difficult than what they have in India. And there are political instability in Thailand. There are political instability in Vietnam. See, only China is a totalitarian country. Again, the protests are coming because some cases happened when a coal-based chemical plant was put up in China. People protested and stopped it. So trends are changing in China also. So there's no need to feel pessimistic or diffident that we have something which Vietnam has. We don't have something which Vietnam has or Thailand has. They don't have it. We can always do all that requires the proactive policies. Activists have to play a more positive and friendly role and a constructive role instead of blocking every project. For example, sterilite industries, which have been closed down, which have done enormous damage to the Indian reputation. India was a net exporter of copper. Now it has become a net importer of copper. I can speak several times on this. I don't have time for this. I only mention one thing here. There was a Saudi Arabian entrepreneur who wanted to set up a project in India. Then he talked to me. Then he wanted to talk to me over a conference call. Then I agreed. Then I tried my level best to invite him. He said, "Sir, if I have to set up a project in India, I'm told I have to give the politicians certain money every year. Is it true?" I said, "It is not true, but this is what I'm told." Then he said, "Some mob will come and stop the project, even if judiciary gives an order in favor of the project. Is it true?" I said, "It's not the isolated case, it doesn't do." All I'm trying to stress here is, these are all the impressions that is getting abroad. So finally, I just finished with one thing. Let us not be under the impression that Chinese chemical industries are going to, multinational companies are going to get out of China overnight and come everywhere. That is not going to happen. Because the level of investments that have been made by multinational companies in China, the level of technology transfers they have done, the level of joint sector ventures they have done, companies like DuPont, Dow, and all of BASF are big R&D research and development laboratories in China. The commitment of the multinational companies into China is very deep. It just cannot be got rid of it overnight. It's not just going to happen. Then what will happen? It's quite possible, given the COVID-19 scenario, China being viewed as a villain by anybody, it's quite possible multinational companies will start looking elsewhere. They would not like to put all the eggs in the one basket. So it's not going to happen by multinational companies stopping the operations in China, but possibly by looking for elsewhere to set up new projects. That is where India has a chance, India has to utilize. That depends on the government policies, not only on the government policies. Let us stop blaming government for everything. It also depends upon our scientists and technologies to make us the better. It also depends upon Indian private entrepreneurs who need to develop a broader mindset than being family-centric. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Venkataraman, for the excellent talk. As usual, you have given the practical problems faced by the chemical industries in India. And I'm sure that government also will take some clue from this and help the chemical industries to grow in India. And whatever the questions coming from the audience will take a lot of time. So one or two questions I would like to ask Mr. Swaminathan. Somebody has asked me the demographic dividend, that is the age advantage in India, is not going to help India.
The question is, the demographic dividend is a much misused word, because 30% of the Indian population are below the poverty line, around 250 to 300 million people. Still, the balance people is enough commodity there. Demographic dividend has to work. But then the demographic dividend has to be exploited by setting up only projects. Now projects are not available. There are people, consumers are there. Demand is going up in the country, variety of areas. People want to buy. They would buy from India if products are available in India. What is the point in talking about democratic advantage, which is leading to increasing demand, which is going to the advantage of multinational companies, overseas organization, rather to India? That's why I said, if you want to exploit the demographic dividend, do it by setting up projects in the country. Demographic dividend is a good advantage provided you are able to exploit it.
Thank you. Swaminathan, one question to you, that what kind of projects the Indian chemical industry should think to attract from China? Whether it is polypropylene or styrene. I mean, can you give some specific ideas for the Indian entrepreneurs, particularly for Tamil Nadu entrepreneurs? You know the Tamil Nadu industries are familiar to you. So what kind of projects we should think?
I think Mr. Venkataraman briefly touched upon that by saying that we need to look at projects where there is a attractiveness to multinationals as well as attractiveness where there is a benefit to India, and where there is a demand in India where we have feedstock advantage, like for example titanium dioxide that you mentioned. I think we have to study projects like that where we are not hampered by disadvantages of feedstock or such things, and where we have an advantage of feedstock, where we have an advantage of market, where such projects we have to carefully think of and look at attracting to India. I think that needs to be studied case by case. That is what Mr. Venkataraman also mentioned, where he gave a few cases. I think that is how we need to look at it strategically.
Thank you. With the more refineries, there is a naphtha surplus situation in India. Will anyone be interested, multinational companies, to set up a naphtha cracker in Tamil Nadu?
This is a question of cost-benefit analysis. What is the cost at which naphtha is going to be available? And what is the alternative is the natural gas. What is the cost at which natural gas is going to be available? It's purely a cost-benefit decision. Now, dependence on the international market for the crude oil. Today, the crude oil price has come to a negative, very small level. This is not going to continue. As a matter of fact, Swaminathan made an extensive study on the crude price forecast, where he has said that internationally, the price of crude oil is going to go up. It's not going. Today is a very, very awkward or unusual situation. Price of crude oil is going to go up. With India so much dependent upon the crude oil imports and international price of crude oil going up, the naphtha project that is going to come up in the country, if at all, is going to be it does not have any particular competitive advantage. So that has to be looked into. And without, say, same thing in the case of natural gas too. India is committing big for natural gas, creating a number of new LNG terminals and all that. Ultimately, when it comes to a question of cost factors, if you see, we have to know there is no restriction in imports. If somebody is available, crude oil is available at the price of 1 and we have a crude oil price at 2, somebody has available price of natural gas 1, we have the price of natural gas 2, India will be at disadvantage. So we need to, in case of this naphtha, you need to ensure that the basic raw material, crude oil, we have control over it. There are so many ways of doing it. But then, without taking this into consideration, earlier naphtha plants were doing very well. Suddenly, they got into a problem with the international crude oil price coming down. Naphtha is looking up. That one example is the Haldia Petrochemicals, which has been revived spectacularly now after this. That is happening. But you need to have a long-term view. From this point of view, the feasibility of getting naphtha at international price, that has to be examined. With feedstock disadvantage, going ahead with the naphtha, this will be like putting the cart before the horse.
Thank you. We had excellent interactions, and I think many more programs will be conducted by CAA like this. Even Mr. Venkataraman has agreed to conduct a big program on the China issue itself once the normalcy is restored. And Ravi Raghavan from Chemical Weekly assured that another program can be conducted like this by the Chemical Industry Association. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Venkataraman. Thank you, Mr. Swaminathan. Thank you, Mr. Magendra Kumar. Good night to all the viewers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.